And I want to talk about something today that at first might seem a bit disjointed from the reality in which we face. But I think there's more to it than that. My first experience of Yosemite was decades ago, driving north out of our home in LA along the Pacific Coast Highway. Francis and I headed in the Sierra Nevada. We came from the east, stopping in the town of Angels Camp. Beautiful little place, procuring supplies, and these beautiful stone plates, which I still have. You'd be interested in, Bob. We entered the park from the west, where most people enter, and the ranger at the gate said, well, it's about an hour and a half down to the valley floor. I thought, what kind of valley is this? In California, they like to do a lot of the back and forth serpentines, and we finally got there. And I had a beautiful picture for this piece here to show you the sublime grandeur of Yosemite with the valley and the falls. It really is quite something. Francis and I stopped for lunch at the Grand Hotel, and then we ventured towards the river. There's a stream, as in the story, that runs through the valley. It was hot, and we decided a swim was in order, so we scrambled down the bank. Now, it's a glacier stream, so it's cold. And there was a sandbar in the middle of the stream, and I decided that, being the bear that I am, I'm going to go lie on that sandbar with my face looking up to the sky. And as I sat there and the water was moving all over my body except for my face, suddenly I felt as if I was flying over the valley. A religious experience that I'll never forget. And then I remembered something that Henry David Thoreau, one of our greats, said when he said, "In wildness we are saved." Not wilderness, in wildness are we saved. So when Barbara Welsh asked me to preach on John Muir because she won that in the auction, so be sure, this is an early announcement, be sure to come to the auction in November, because you too can tell me what to say. She wanted me to talk about John Muir. I was honored. Dusty Welsh, Barbara's husband, was devoted to the life and lessons of John Muir. Dusty was a celebrated scientist at the University of Pennsylvania by vocation, and he made many pilgrimages with Barbara and their family to Yosemite, to other places of pilgrimage in John Muir's life, to the Wisconsin of his youth, even to Dunbar, Scotland, where he was born. Dusty found in Muir, I believe, a science married to the amazement of divine nature. Among Dusty's notes, which he used to speak about Muir often, was this quote. Muir wrote, "There's a love of wild nature in everybody, an ancient mother love, ever showing itself whether recognized or not, however covered in cares and duties. The love of nature so essential to our faith as Unitarian Universalists. It spoke to Dusty, Barbara, their family. It was the very reason for having science at all. Science which will prevail even with all the onslaught that's coming upon it. So I am honored today to present this sermon in memory of Dusty Welsh, to his contributions to environmental justice, and to the understanding of nature's divinity, both poetically and scientifically. And I'm especially happy to be able to do this now in the midst of the apocalypse in which we are living. I remind you that apocalypse doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. It means a revelation of a new world being born. Or as several of my colleagues said at a conference I went to this weekend, perhaps these are the birth pangs of a new movement. John Muir was born in Scotland, April 21st, 1838. His father was a strict evangelical, rigid and stern in both his faith and in his family. The Muir family, there were 8 of them in all, immigrated to Wisconsin when John was 7 and settled on the frontier just north of Madison. His childhood was harsh by any standard. John and his brothers worked the land and Then the land was just trees, of course. Felling the trees, building the cabin, building the barn, planting the crops, tearing out the stumps. When not working, they were subject to Bible lessons and beatings. As soon as Muir was able, he left home and enrolled in the new state university in Madison, Wisconsin, earning his tuition and board through manual labor, but also his ingenuity at being able to fix almost anything. He tried several courses of study before deciding on the course of botany under the celebrated Professor John Carr. And then the Civil War. The Civil War changed all his plans. Something of a pacifist in his way, he was eager not to be drafted. So he left the university and traveled to Indianapolis, where he soon found work as a millwright. He would find these mills, and they would hire him to fix the mills, and this was all steam-powered with big belts and big saws. Of course, it was a time in Indiana as well when the great forests of that Midwest place were all being cut down for crops, the wood being turned into lumber to build houses. He was also a gifted inventor, and he kept trying to sell his inventions in various places. He never got a patent for any of them, although he did win a patent for a mechanical clock at a state fair once. But John Muir was always conflicted about working with the tools that were leading to the destructions of the forests of the Midwest. Still, in order to live, he needed to work. And he continued for 4 years in Indianapolis until a metal shaving on one of the tools he was working with flew into his right eye. It blinded him, and for a while, it blinded his left eye as well in sympathy, and then that came back. But he was nursed for many, many months by the mill owner's wife. It was a time when we didn't discard people because they failed to work anymore. We nursed them back to health. He eventually regained his sight in both eyes, and he wrote about this to his friend, the professor's wife, Jean Carr, who was something of a mother figure for him. And she wrote back to him and she said, "John, perhaps your accident is a sign for you to develop your inner eye, your third eye, and return to the study of nature that rests in your soul." It was a prescient observation. So John Muir left Indianapolis and decided to join his brother Daniel, who had migrated to Canada, like others are thinking about these days, to avoid the draft. See, it goes back a long way. The two brothers wandered the woods and meadows of Ontario, all the while Muir, being the botanist, the naturalist that he was, keeping fastidious notes and drawings. His drawings are really quite incredible of plants and trees. And it was in those ramblings that Muir sensed the interconnection of all life, what we call the seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism, the interconnection of all life of which we are a part. And he penned this truth: when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. Now in his late 20s, the Civil War ended. Muir decided it was time for him to return to the United States. He never finished his degree, but he was an avid reader, and he dreamed of going to South America to study the tropical flora. And he spent many months walking the entire 1,000-mile journey through the upper Midwest and into the South to go to a port that would take him to South America. And this is the South that was in the post-Civil War era, ruins of war, desperation, squalor. He finally arrived in Florida, and there was no boat going anywhere to South America. So while he was waiting, he found a job once again as a millwright for a Scottish family that was grinding date palms into flour. Their grinder had broken. Of course, he fixed it. He set to work, ever industrious, for several months until he fell sick with malaria. Malaria. Again, it was the mill owner's wife who nursed him back from the edge of death. He did finally catch a boat to Cuba with plans to go on to South America, but when he was in Cuba, he had this revelation that he was going in the wrong direction. that he didn't like being hot. He didn't like that. He wanted to be cold. And he was a little guy. I mean, he was like 5'7", all of 138 pounds dripping wet. He realized he needed cool weather and all of the nature's elements in order to thrive. So with what savings he had, because he was Scottish after all and he saved, he sailed up to New York and then took a steamer from New York around South America to California. It was in California that he found his true home. The grandeur of the ocean as it meets the coastal range left him wanting more. Initially, he found work as a shepherd, and he would drive these sheep up into the high meadows of the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, but he came to hate sheep. He called them locusts on hooves. They destroyed the alpine meadows that he so loved. And he hated the people he worked with because they were just so slovenly. He'd heard about Yosemite from other people. He didn't discover it. It had been known for a while. It, of course, had been stolen like so much from the native peoples who were there. And he went there and he realized that he was standing in the midst of his cathedral, his spiritual home, as in the story where he built a cabin that overlooked the falls. He found work once again as a millwright. At that point, there were a lot of downed trees in the valley, and he was hauling the trees into the mill to get them cut and turned into houses. But he also could see where this was going. And this was a time of the Industrial Revolution, where they were felling great, beautiful sequoias and redwoods for lumber. He had begun to write articles, short articles about the power of nature for magazines such as Scribner's, The Atlantic, the Oberlin Monthly, eventually Harper's. And this earned him enough money to finally leave mill work and devote all his time to his true vocation, which was to be a naturalist, to study and catalog and learn about the land of the West. And it was about this time that he met Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was on a trip west with his entourage of admirers. And only when Muir was able to go camping with Emerson did he discuss Muir's true philosophy, which he called the joy of the wild. Now, Emerson's transcendentalism. Transcendentalism means that understanding of the divine that is beyond books and beyond institutions, that's all around us, resonated with Muir, and he also had heard and read some of the writings of Emerson's younger colleague, Henry David Thoreau, who was half a generation older than Muir. And while Thoreau and Muir never met, Thoreau died quite young, actually. They exchanged letters and ideas. He absorbed Thoreau's natural theology, and he built upon it and made it deeper and more meaningful to him. At this point, John Muir had rejected the stern Calvinism of his father, which his father, by the way, never really forgave him for. It was a sad story, but he was unable, though, to completely jettison God from his natural theology. He wasn't quite that far yet. But Muir was studying Darwin, and he later met Darwin's American provocateur collaborator, Aisha Gray. And they convinced Muir that God may have had a hand in providing the elements, the ingredients for nature's joy, but it was nature herself that was divine, that created the perfect balance between life and death. John Muir saw in nature evidence of life's mystery, the mysterious divine, the divinity that even humanity itself participated in, if only they could see it. He had a true mysticism. He said it was the secret of the mysterious enjoyment that was both strange calm and divine frenzy. His was what is known in theological circles as a panentheism, not pantheism, but panentheism. That is, God is in all things. The divinity that was all around him was evidenced in the nature that he saw, both its sublimity and its fury. Thus, the story about stepping behind the waterfall. He was always doing crazy stuff like that. It almost cost him in life many times. He seemed to be almost fearless. There was a time he hiked up Mount Shasta, and he was caught in a sudden blizzard, only on the top of the mountain. Everywhere else down in the valley and below, it was a calm, sunny day. But up there was this mini blizzard that he huddled against a rock with his light coat on and somehow survived. And still, he worshiped nature's joy. Our spiritual theme this month is joy. Now, given the utter insanity of the world right now, and the very real suffering of government workers, of the contractors who are suffering government workers, of the people across the world who've lost USAID, people are dying. This is real. The suffering of so many innocent people, it might seem insensitive for me to explore joy this month. But friends, without a sense of joy, what are we working to improve? What are we trying to change? And as I will be exploring throughout the month, joy actually might be, in Audre Lorde's words, an act of resistance. Can you hear me? If, Thoreau said, salvation lies in wildness, then how can we deny nature's wildness in bringing a bit of joy in the apocalypse? Because look around. Not a sunny day, but a beautiful day. And nature just keeps doing her thing. We keep trying to screw it up, but it keeps doing her thing. And that's what we're struggling for. The beauty of life envisioned in nature and in the life and hearts of good-meaning people everywhere. It's possible that by exploring joy, we begin our journey of becoming what I hope we will become, which is a community of resistance. Can you hear me? The British Druid priestess and scholar Emma Restall Orr found this joyful spirit in her belief in animism, which is the belief that all existence contains divine energy. She wrote, "In animism, relationship is ontologically fundamental. We exist because we are in relationship. The point of being here is to be in relationship. Relationship is everything. It is our relationships that form us, and how we engage in those relationships inform the world and the filters through which we live and perceive the world. At a basic level," she said, "our purpose is no more than to be what we are within the greater purpose of nature's soul." Ultimately, I believe this is what Dusty found in the prophetic life of John Muir, that divinity rests in the world around us and through us, and ultimately our relationship with the world and each other. Muir wrote that we are in the mountains and the mountains are in us. And part of that relationship is in our care for the planet, which we'll be exploring here. This is April. At the end of the month, on April 26th, we'll have a Earth Day celebration right here. And I want everyone to come that afternoon and enjoy and volunteer. This is the plug, Pam. Volunteer outside. There's a table right outside the door. We're going to need volunteers. We've got dozens of groups and other congregations who are a part of this celebration. This is going to be a big deal. Muir helped, of course, to do a lot of other things. He founded the Sierra Club, which to this day works to preserve the joy of nature, and the organizations like it that preserve a bit of wildness while there's still time. But of course, as we're learning now, having just parks and parcels of wildness out there are not going to preserve the planet, because everything's interconnected, right? So we here, individual people, need to collect and make little corridors for wildness to grow. Using the book, Nature's Best Hope, we will be using this to do the work of celebrating the wildness and enhancing it. I applaud this effort, and I applaud it for various reasons, but most of all, I applaud it because it upholds the divinity of nature in us and around us. I see this as joy, as an act of resistance. And I know many of you, because you talk to me throughout the week, are like, I don't know what to do. There's a lot of stress. Quite frankly, there's trauma now. There's a lot to be pessimistic. In terms of nature, I think to myself, is that there enough time Maybe not to stop climate change, but to mitigate the results, to remain hopeful that there is something we still can do. Muir, Thoreau, and eventually the United States government under Teddy Roosevelt, who became a friend of John Muir, by the way, have done something to help the reserves, the forests, the parks. Last weekend, our kids treated us to a getaway in the Shenandoah Mountains in Virginia. Went to a lovely little cabin by a stream. Was marveling, it's a little bit south of here, so marveling as the buds were opening and the flowering, and you would almost think all was right with the world. They bought me a lifetime pass, because I'm old enough now, to the national parks. Maybe not the best time to have a lifetime pass to the national parks. And as I pondered the joy and wildness, I also remembered why the parks were formed. As we were driving into the Shenandoah National Park, I looked at the tired and harried rangers at the gate. I thanked them for their service because I knew that they were all pretty much pulling double shifts now. And as we drove through the park, there was a lot that was left undone. Normally, they try to clean up along the road a little bit, to cut up some of the downs, but they were all there. And I thought to myself, well, that's as Earth would have it, wouldn't it? After we're gone, she's going to come back. And I thought about why we do this way. Of course, I'm always thinking about the social impact of a system like the park system. And I remembered someone saying, well, we should just turn over all these parks and the entrance fees to the American Indian nations from whom we stole the legacy to begin with and let them manage the parks. I don't have an answer for the end of the world, friends. But I do know this. I do know that it's not an accident that we are calmed by nature. We are calmed by her wildness, even the unkept bits. Because ours is still a greening temple that can still bring us joy. And I personally call that natural joy my God. Perhaps, with all due respect, my church. And I believe, as my friend Tom Owen Toll once said, that most UUs are what he called free-thinking mystics with hands. It's a lovely image. And we are greatly fed by nature, aren't we? And I love the ideas and words that come from that pursuit. But I'm often most at home outside. Now, gone are the days, if there ever were, and I'm looking at Francis here, when I actually camped. I don't really camp well, but I love to walk outside. John Muir and Dusty Welsh knew this truth. As Emerson wrote, nothing is quite beautiful alone. Nothing is beautiful but in the whole. A single object is only so far beautiful as it suggests a universal grace. That grace is the wild nature of things, all things, in relationship to everything else. And as I lay in that Yosemite riverbed feeling the grace wash over me, I saw, but for that moment, the relationship between all things. John Muir wrote in one of his unpublished journals, "This grand show is eternal. It is always sunrise somewhere. The dew is never all dried at once. A shower is forever falling somewhere. Vapor is ever rising somewhere. Eternal sunrise, eternal sunset, eternal dawn. On sea, continents, islands, each in its turn, the round earth rolls." This might sum up our faith as you use. A God in us, around us, that ultimately is us. Good God, bad God, no God at all. In these turbulent times, friends, many of you are already doing this, but I prescribe a walk outdoors, get outside. Muir finally said this towards the end of his long life. Of all the paths you take in life, make sure a few of them are of dirt. There is still joy in that. Amen.